Hello and welcome to this second of two talks on Aldous Huxley's novel Brave New World. When we talk about the date of this novel, 1932, there's a couple further things to contextualize here. One, we're talking about the Great Depression, and so the question is certainly in the air at the time for Huxley about the stability of society, because nothing like the Depression would suggest the devastating impact of kind of social instability, right? The economy has tanked, people are out of jobs, nothing is consistent there. He also, a few years earlier, had traveled to America and was very struck by what was culturally different in the States. Huxley liked the confidence, vitality, and generous extravagance he found in American life, but he wasn't so sure that he liked the way vitality was expressed in places of public amusement, in dancing and motoring. Nowhere, perhaps, he said, is there so little conversation. It is all movement and noise, like the water gurgling out of a bath down the waist. Yes, down the waist. Those thoughts of the actual world from the book Jesting Pilot were to color his picture of the perpetual happiness attempted in Brave New World. So he's got a lot of these things cooking in the background to make him think that he has worries and concerns about what may be coming in the future. This is a strange little article, but it makes some good points. I wouldn't be completely reliant on it because it's coming from a kind of curious viewpoint, but it's a good initial discussion about the idea of stability as it relates to Brave New World. The author here says, "Man alone among the creatures of the earth abhors stability. Man alone among the creatures of the earth possesses the ability and the inclination to question, to imagine, to build, to take risks for the sake of advancing some perhaps unarticulated goal. In other words, to achieve. Stability, that is, the status quo, is not among mankind's intrinsic goals. Were it otherwise, were mankind hardwired to remain content with the status quo, to be happy with stability, well, we'd still be hunting with flint-tipped spears and dressed in animal skins. So the idea is, what took us to the surface of the moon, what took us to discover the components of the atom, is this restless desire in people for something new and something better. But in the novel Brave New World, that is being put to rest. In other words, we're supposed to just be happy with the way things are. And that's one of the reasons why history is banished from that world, because history is always an introduction to the idea that sometime else, somewhere else, things are different. And that is a disruptive idea. Noticeably absent, the article continues, from Huxley's dystopia is the Orwellian surveillance, which is found in so many other dystopian novels. And that, we hear this all the time in the UK, particularly about the degree of surveillance we're subjected to. We have the highest percentage or the highest ratio of CCTV cameras per head of population than anywhere. That was true a few years ago. I'm not sure if it still is, but you get the idea. We're constantly being surveilled. Huxley instead envisioned a world in which ever-present surveillance wasn't necessary. Each citizen is simply brainwashed from birth in a haunting system of conditioning and incentives. The hatcheries manager, who is charged, among other things, with implementing this process, describes it thusly. The sum of the suggestions is the child's mind, the adult's mind too, all his life long. All these suggestions are our suggestions, the suggestions from the state, and they build them into these babies right from the beginning. They set them out and give them the option to go explore nature or books, and they get a shock, right? There is no need for an overbearing system of surveillance because there is no misbehavior. All of the citizens' thoughts are the mere product of the government's suggestions. So it's a completely different kind of tyranny, one that's built in. One of the chief lessons of Brave New World is that the greatest human achievements arise from suffering. And this is my theme that's going to carry through this talk today, is what is the role of suffering within the novel of Brave New World? Shakespeare's plays would hold little meaning if his characters lived a perpetually happy but undistinguished life. The beauty of the emotion that shines in the darkest moments imbues the words of the bard with timeless relevance and humanity. Creative destruction, absent interference from the government, is what drives economies to the heights that we'd come to expect. And this is why this essay is a little bit weird, because it's coming from a kind of economic point of view. But he's making the point that it is from failure that we learn our most important lessons. You have to fail before you're going to be a success. Business firms have to take the good and the bad and learn to succeed without necessarily the hindrance of the government or assistance. So you can see he's got a kind of economic argument he's making here. But Brave New World shows that the greatest heights are achieved only by those willing to suffer at times, because in Brave New World, suffering is smoothed out, but so is great achievement. It's all stability. So what in the time of the Depression might have looked as a welcome thing to have stability restored is now taken to its kind of logical, absurd conclusion. What if all we had was stability? So this article is kind of thinking back to what we said about Neil Postman's view of Orwell's 1984 as opposed to the Brave New World, which has to do with the way media and popular culture continually distract us. So you can see at the bottom here, Huxley's predictions about sexual freedom have largely come true, but this author's arguing Brave New World was wrong about the essentials. He says, I fully expect that I will get to go to the feelies before I die, and I do think that's probably true. We're going to be sitting somewhere with virtual reality headsets on and wired into something. The feelies, as readers of Huxley's Brave New World remember, are movies taken to the next level. You sit in a seat equipped with special knobs, and when you grasp them, the sensations of the characters on screen are transmitted to your own nerve endings. If, as seems likely, the most popular application of feelies will turn out to be pornography, that would not have surprised Huxley in the slightest. Indeed, in Brave New World, the hero, and this is the hero in the second half of the novel, a noble savage named John, who's the reader's scout in ultramodern London. He's the guy through whom we're kind of seeing this Brave New World. Well, he goes to a feelie, and I love this. The name of the feelie, the movie that he goes to see, is called 3 Weeks in a Helicopter, which seems to consist of nothing but a pair of lovers having sex in, as promised, a helicopter. The stereoscopic lips came together again, and once more the facial erogenous zones of the 6,000 spectators in the Alhambra cinema tingled with almost intolerable galvanic pleasure. Galvanic meaning skin response. So they're literally feeling this happen. The point that Huxley's making here is what a dumb name for a movie, and what a completely pointless, plot-free film this is. 3 weeks in a helicopter of lovers having sex. There's no human ups and downs to this. There's no kind of emotional connection. There's no, this is the stuff of drama. What makes for a story? You need those emotional ups and downs for it to have meaning. So this is what we're talking about today, is the connection between suffering and meaning. 3 Weeks in a Helicopter is a fairly meaningless film. But even the word pornography, however, is a term that would have no meaning in Huxley's world state, or rather its meaning would be the reverse of what it has now. This is in keeping with the sexual topsy-turviness of Huxley's dystopia, which turns all our taboos inside out. So, sex, promiscuity, even the sexual orientation of children, which is one of the, biggest taboos we have in society, that seems to be normal in Brave New World, because it's all part of keeping people out of committed, connected, monogamous relationships. Oh, nope, it's supposed to be just all freewheeling. So in fact, in Brave New World, the most obscene word, the one that has the power to make people blush and flee the room, is mother, someone who actually gave birth the old-fashioned way. The most antisocial sexual behavior is monogamy, and a man is a perfect gentleman if he refrains from paying too much attention to any particular one of the women he's sleeping with. All of this is because in Huxley's meticulously imagined future, the cardinal virtue is simply satisfying your appetites, a la Caliban in Brave New World. The worst vice is to repress your appetites. So he has turned the world we know on its head. But I think the point is, when you look at the world we live in now, which is filled with distraction and the internet and pornography and triviality and endless information, that people become quite egotistic. They put up their Facebook pages to display themselves, and it becomes all about fulfilling their appetites. Here I am on holiday in Majorca. Here I am fulfilling all my most base desires. Here I am drinking. Here I am whatever. It's not, here's a picture of me studying, although I'm sure my students are different. That's probably all they post on Facebook. So going back to Neil Postman's book, this article says, he was writing about the social effects of television in 1985. We would probably be talking about the internet. And he thought Huxley was especially prescient, forward-looking. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression and adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. So this, does not really help us to think in much depth. Postman wrote all that in distinguishing between the cheerful dominion of Brave New World and the more lugubrious or dark tyranny in Orwell's 1984. Unlike Huxley, however, Postman wasn't much bothered simply by the mindless fun and the junk entertainment. So, Huxley was disturbed by the degree to which we're simply distracted. Postman says, hey, listen, I don't mind a bit of fun. I don't mind junk TV, whatever. What really disturbed Postman was, and was more alarming, was how television co-ops, that is, takes over serious modes of discourse. That is, where there's supposed to be discussions of news, politics, science, education, business or commerce, religion. Television has a tendency to turn even those into entertainment. That's what worries Postman, is the devaluing of the serious discussions. So if a news story becomes just entertainment, that's problematic. And we see this discussed all the time. Here's an article from 1982, why TV news is increasingly being packaged as entertainment, because they need the ratings. It's a business, and they fear you turning off, so they will keep you entertained, and that's going to distort your understanding of the news. This was discussed back during the attacks on Baghdad, when America was bombing Baghdad, and the video that was shot from the planes dropping the bombs were played again and again on CNN and on the networks, and people feared this was like watching a video game. This was like an entertainment form. And I think what Postman would say is, no, I'm sorry, these are people actually being killed. That's not entertainment. Something is getting blurred and confused here. So it's a kind of outworking of Huxley's fundamental concern, which is we're just too distracted. Postman refines that a bit and says, well, we're distracted to the point that we're unable to have a serious discussion about things of worldwide importance. So we get this discussion of the goal of stability in chapter 3 when Mustafa Mond, who's the kind of world controller, is explaining to a group of boys who are touring the hatchery. He says, see these words like mother, monogamy, romance. These are all bad things in this world. High spurts the fountain, fierce and foamy the wild jet. The urge has but a single outlet, my love, my baby. These are all, sexual images. And he says, listen, human sexuality is always churning away. And what happens if you're monogamous? He says, well, then it only has one single outlet. No wonder those poor pre-moderns were mad and wicked and miserable. Their world didn't allow them to take things easily, didn't allow them to be sane, virtuous, happy. What with mothers and lovers and the prohibitions that they were not conditioned to obey, what with the temptations and the lonely remorses. I mean, he's talking about all the love stories of our literature, people who are unable to be with the one they love. They're tormented by love. He says, this is crazy. No, we should just open the floodgates and let everybody be with everybody. Okay? He says, what with all their diseases and the endless isolating pain, what with the uncertainties and the poverty, they were forced to feel strongly. Oh, and we don't want that, do we? He says, and feeling strongly, and strongly what was more, in solitude, in hopelessly individual isolation, how could they be stable? Of course they're all mad. I mean, this is Huxley turning all of our romantic traditions on their head and saying, you people are just miserable. No, we're just going to open the floodgates and we'll all have meaningless sex with everybody all the time and everything will be even and stable. Disturbing vision. Or then you get the songs that are sung during, I love this, the solidarity service that Bernard attends in chapter 5. So the new religion worships things like Henry Ford. Well, Henry Ford was the man who developed the assembly line manner of construction in factories. And that's exactly how people are now produced, on an assembly line. Oh, Ford, we are 12. Oh, make us one, like drops within the social river. Oh, make us now together run, as swiftly as thy shining flivver. Orgy, porgy, Ford and fun, kiss the girls and make them one. Boys at one with girls at peace. Orgy, porgy gives release. This is like all religion turned on its head, okay? And again, the message here is we're all the same. Just make everybody the same, and all our worries are over. When John the Savage has a conversation with Mustafa Mond in chapter 17, Mustafa is making the case saying, and if ever by some unlucky chance anything unpleasant should somehow happen, to take you off your little stable path, why, there's always Soma to give you a holiday from the facts. There's always Soma to calm your anger, to reconcile you to your enemies, to make you patient and long-suffering. In the past, you could only accomplish these things by making a great effort, and after years of hard moral training. Now, you swallow 2 or 3 half-gram tablets, and there you are. Anybody can be virtuous now. You can carry at least half of your morality about in a bottle. It's Christianity without tears. That's what Soma is. So, see this world? It's easy. Okay? But we can't help but feel that the meaning that we get through suffering and the highs and the lows is being drained out of human existence. So let's take a look at a passage in chapter 10 where it starts by saying, the hands of all the 4,000 electric clocks in all the Bloomsbury Center's 4,000 rooms marked 27 minutes past 2. In other words, all the clocks are unified. And that's one of the things that defines modernity, is that we have a shared time. Clocks are now, electric or atomic, and we know exactly what time it is everywhere. This hive of industry, as the director was fond of calling it, was in the full buzz of work. And of course, hive is a metaphor borrowed from bees. So it's like we're all worker bees. Everyone was busy, everything in ordered motion. Under the microscopes, their long tails, furiously lashing, spermatozoa were burrowing headfirst into eggs, because they're fertilizing all these eggs. And the eggs were expanding, dividing, or, if Bokanovskified, budding and breaking up into whole populations of separate embryos. So we hear about the Bokanovsky process, whereby one egg can be expanded into multitudes of identical twin babies. From the social predestination room, the escalators went rumbling down into the basement, and there, in the crimson darkness, stewingly warm on their cushion of peritoneum and gorged with blood surrogate and hormones, the fetuses grew. This is where the babies are developing. And they grew and grew, or, poisoned, languished into a stunted epsilonhood. Some are deliberately held back developmentally so that they can become epsilon, so that we have people to do the lesser tasks in society. With a faint hum and rattle, the moving racks crawled imperceptibly through the weeks and the recapitulated eons to where, in the decanting room, the newly unbottled babes uttered their first yell of horror and amazement, much as we feel as readers at seeing this. The dynamos purred in the sub-basement, the lifts rushed up and down. On all the 11 floors of nurseries, it was feeding time. From 1,800 bottles, 1,800 carefully labeled infants were simultaneously sucking down their pint of pasteurized external secretion. So that role of motherhood completely wiped out. Above them, in 10 successive layers of dormitory, the little boys and girls who were still young enough to need an afternoon's sleep were as busy as everyone else, though they did not know it, listening unconsciously to hypnopedic lessons in hygiene and sociability. Hypnopedic is they're being played recordings in their sleep that they're just absorbing unthinkingly, and training in class consciousness, staying in your place, and the toddler's love life. That's a deliberately disturbing, provocative phrase, because the idea is even that element of our morality has been thrown out in this world. Yes, let children explore sexuality. Above these again were the playrooms where, the weather having turned to rain, 900 older children were amusing themselves with bricks and clay modeling, hunt the zipper, and erotic play. I mean, you can see why this book got banned in lots of schools in various places. Well, there was a gasp, a murmur of astonishment and horror. A young girl screamed. Standing on a chair to get a better view, someone upset 2 test tubes full of spermatozoa. Bloated, sagging, and among those firm, youthful bodies, those undistorted faces, a strange and terrifying monster of middle-agedness. Linda advanced into the room. She's been off in the reservation for savages and has not been participating in everything the New World does to keep ourselves youthful and perfect until it's time to die, and then they throw the switch and send you off. She advanced into the room, coquettishly smiling her broken and discolored smile, and rolling as she walked with what was meant to be a voluptuous undulation, her enormous haunches. Bernard walked beside her. "There he is," he said, pointing at the director. "Did you think I didn't recognize him?" Linda asked indignantly. This is the man who got her pregnant and thus led to the birth of John the Savage. Turning to the director, "Of course I knew you, Tomakin." That's her little nickname for him. "I should have known you anywhere among 1,000, but perhaps you've forgotten me. Don't you remember? Don't you remember, Tomakin? You're Linda." See, all this talk, we've been trained in this novel to think this is bad. This is a connection, a long-lasting relationship. To say, "I'm your Linda," that's unacceptable. She stood looking at him, her head on one side, still smiling, but with a smile that became progressively, in the face of the director's expression of petrified disgust, less and less self-confident, that wavered and finally went out. "Don't you remember, Tomakin?" she repeated in a voice that trembled. I mean, she's humiliating him in front of everybody. Her eyes were anxious, agonized, the blotched and sagging face twisted grotesquely into the grimace of extreme grief. "Tomakin!" She held out her arms. Someone began to titter. "What's the meaning," began the director, "of this monstrous..." Tomek! And she ran forward, her blanket trailing behind her, threw her arms round his neck, hid her face on his chest, and a howl of laughter went up irrepressibly. This is the most absurd behavior in this world where we're to have no connections with others. The word, that is, for father, was not so much obscene as with its connotation of something at one remove from the loathsomeness and moral obliquity of childbearing, was merely gross, a kind of scatological rather than a pornographic impropriety. So in other words, the word father, the idea that he has fathered this child is just, well, it's just disgusting. The comically smutty word relieved what had become a quite intolerable tension. Laughter broke out, enormous, almost hysterical, peal after peal, as though it would never stop. My father, which is what John is saying. And it was the director, my father. Oh, Ford, oh, Ford. This is what they say instead of, oh, Lord, oh, Lord. That was really too good. Like the director of the hatcheries has his own birth son. Oh, it's ridiculous. The whooping and the roaring renewed themselves. Faces seemed on the point of disintegration. Tears were streaming. 6 more test tubes of spermatozoa were upset. My father. Oh, it's hilarious. So the thing we've talked about here is the idea that suffering has been erased from this experience through soma, through distractions, through sex, through not having meaningful relationships. You're never pining for someone. And this raises in our minds the question of, why does suffering seem to be key to human experience and a human sense of meaning and purpose? Exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Isn't there something in that, says John the Savage. I mean, let's listen to that again. Taking what is mortal and unsure, that is human life, and exposing it to fortune, that is chance, exposing it to death, exposing it to danger, even if you're doing it just for an eggshell, that is for nothing. Isn't there something in that? Isn't there something essentially human about that? Quite apart from God, though of course God would be a reason for it, but isn't there something in living dangerously? The controller says, yes, there's a great deal in it. Women and men must, of course, have their adrenals stimulated from time to time. That is the gland that gives us adrenaline. So if you're hugely frightened, adrenaline courses through your body. And he's seeing it as a chemical experience. What? Questioned the Savage, uncomprehending. Yes, it's one of the conditions of perfect health. That's why we've made the VPS treatments compulsory. VPS? Violent Passion Surrogate. Regularly, once a month, we flood the whole system with adrenaline. That is adrenaline. It's the complete physiological equivalent of fear and rage. All the tonic effects of murdering Desdemona and being murdered by Othello without any of the inconveniences. So in other words, he's saying everything we experience in the tragedy of Othello, Shakespeare's play, where Othello kills his wife, this horrible, dramatic conclusion. He says, well, you get all that excitement without any of the inconveniences. John says, but I like the inconveniences. I don't want this smoothed out and then get my excitement from having a drug pumped through me. Well, we don't like the inconveniences, said the controller. We prefer to do things comfortably. But I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. Well, in fact, says Mustafa Mond, you're claiming the right to be unhappy. All right, then, says the Savage defiantly. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Not to mention the right to grow old and ugly and impotent, the right to have syphilis and cancer, the right to have too little to eat, the right to be lousy, the right to live in constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow, the right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind. There was a long silence. I claim them all, said the Savage at last. Mustafa Mond shrugged his shoulders. Well, you're welcome, he said. So here's the thing I want to just conclude by saying. This emphasis on suffering is somehow key to human existence. If you want a really good explanation of how that works, I suggest you go to this YouTube link. If you just type into YouTube, Robert F. Kennedy announces the death of Martin Luther King. This is what actually happened. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert Kennedy, who was JFK, John F. Kennedy's brother, JFK had already been assassinated, and Robert Kennedy was now running for president. And he's flying into my home state of Indiana, to the city of Indianapolis, and he's told on the flight, Martin Luther King's been assassinated. These people won't know about it. It was largely a black audience he was speaking to. And he said, they said, you're going to have to announce, because they don't have the internet, they didn't see it on TV, you're going to have to tell them that Martin Luther King has been shot. And his speechwriter says, listen, I'm going to write something up for you because we'll be there shortly. And Robert Kennedy said, no, I got it. I got this. And he wrote his own speech. And that video clip is Robert Kennedy delivering that speech. And you just have to watch it because it's the best explanation of what we are to do with sorrow and suffering in our life. He quotes the ancient Greek poet Aeschylus. And again, here we are with poetry, literature, all the things that have been wiped out of the brave new world. And he says, Aeschylus wrote these lines, even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. And the idea is, this is where we learn, this is where we find meaning, and if you wipe all that suffering out of our lives, there would be no meaning left. So if you think about it, what is the thing that gives meaning to our relationships? In part, it's the risk of losing those relationships. That's what makes us value things in the present. And the brave new world is working desperately to eliminate that risk. But if you eliminate risk, you eliminate meaning. So Katrine Kuiper's article says, look, there's an unholy alliance in this novel of industrial, capitalist, fascist, communist, psychoanalytic, and pseudo-scientific ideologies that has kind of managed to try to bring about the end of history in the Brave New World. The past is taboo. We don't talk about that because that's history. And we know to understand history is to understand things might be different. Things might be better. As R. Ford so eloquently said, Henry Ford thought history was bunk. He actually said that. And there's no future because history's ends have been accomplished. We're all happy now. There is no pain, no deformity, no crime, anguish, or social discontent. Even death has no more sting. Children are acclimatized to the death palaces from the age of 18 months. They're encouraged to poke around and eat chocolate creams while the dying are ushered into oblivion on Soma, watching sports and pornography on television. Post-mortem, after death, the useful chemicals in every corpse are recovered in cremation to be used as fertilizer. It's fine to think we can go on being socially useful even after we're dead, gloats one character, making plants grow. All pain has been removed from human experience, and with it goes all meaning. In a review of Brave New World called We Don't Want to Be Happy, the philosopher Bertrand Russell elaborated on the promise and perils of this scientific deliverance from pain. Huxley, he wrote, has undertaken to make us sad by the contemplation of a world without sadness. After describing the material comforts of the fictional society, he reflected on the puzzling instinct to recoil from it. He said, in spite of these merits, the world which Mr. Huxley portrays is such as to arouse disgust in every normal reader. And obviously in Mr. Huxley himself. I've been asking myself why and trying hard to think that his well-regulated world would really be an improvement upon the one in which we live. I mean, remember, the depression, economic instability, pain, death, they're all fixed. And he says, and I tried to imagine, wouldn't that be an improvement? At moments, I can make myself think this, but I can never make myself feel it. The feeling of revulsion against a well-ordered world has various sources. One of these is that we don't value happiness as much as we sometimes think we do. So if you were happy, 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 and distracted, distracted, distracted for months and years on end, you'd ultimately feel that some kind of meaning is missing from all this. And that's part of the puzzle of human existence. Unlike the other great dystopias, Huxley's world state, though totalitarian in its orthodoxy, is ostensibly ordered on the wants of the governed rather than the governors. This is what the people want. They want to be happy. Threats are rarely used or needed. It's ruled by bread and circuses, which was a Roman idea, the idea of keep the people fed and distracted and you'll keep them under control. Well, that has proved more potent than force and more pernicious, precisely because every means of control is a perversion of something people really want. The only people with any capacity for dissatisfaction are a handful of alphas, the thinkers, who are as unable to articulate their objection as Russell is. It is difficult to reject the sinister when, by slight distortion, it masquerades as something sublime. And why would we not love this? Happy all the time. Why feeling should be able to distinguish these things while reason cannot is an interesting question. We feel that we don't want this, but rationally, hey, it looks great. One which could be left forever unsettled by tinkering through biotechnology or psychological control with what Huxley, in a later foreword to the book, called the natural forms and expressions of life itself. So it's Bertrand Russell who says, rationally, I could think my way into believing that this new world order is a good thing, but my heart would never allow me to participate in it. Okay, that's the end of our discussion of Brave New World. I hope you found that useful, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much.